Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. Goodbye, Evelyn, she said, her voice soft and chilling. You should have stayed out of my way. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't an accident, it was murder. My own sister, driven by jealousy and hatred, had tried to kill me. The flames engulfed me, searing my skin, stealing my breath. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, and then I saw him, Alexander Kane. His face, blurred by the smoke and the flames, was the last thing I saw before darkness consumed me. He was reaching out to me, his eyes filled with what? Concern, regret, love? I didn't know. But in that final fleeting moment, I understood he had been the one. The one who had seen through the lies, the one who had tried to protect me, the one who had cared. And it was too late. Alexander, I whispered, my voice a choked gasp. Then nothing. My life planner was basically a Pinterest board come to life. Rich girl chic Evelyn Stone. Honestly, the name alone sounded like a brand of overpriced bottled water. I was the perfectly packaged product of old money and societal expectations, engaged to Henry Sterling, a Ken doll with a trust fund and a remarkably convincing nice guy act. Our world was a never-ending cocktail party, a carousel of air kisses and empty compliments. I was supposed to be radiant, which, as far as I could tell, meant smiling vacantly while wearing dresses that cost more than a small car. My parents, especially my mother, treated me like a show pony, parading me around in the hopes of securing the perfect match. Henry was their blue ribbon winner. He was handsome, I'll give him that, and charming in that utterly predictable, I went to an Ivy League school and learned how to mimic human emotion kind of way. He ticked all the boxes. Wealth, status, a jawline that could cut glass. He also had the moral compass of a particularly greedy alley cat, but that part wasn't on the brochure. He was using me, of course, my family's connections, our money, my everything. I was just a particularly shiny rung on his ladder to the top. And then there was Vanessa, my darling little sister, a picture of purity in a pink dress. She was always lurking around, pretending to be sweet and supportive while secretly sharpening her teeth. She wanted everything I had, especially Henry. Her jealousy wasn't even subtle. It was like a flashing neon sign above her head. I will destroy you, Evelyn. You're so lucky to have Henry, she'd purr, her voice dripping with enough sugar to induce a coma. He's just dreamy. Yeah, dreamy if your dreams involve financial fraud and emotional manipulation. I, in my infinite naivety, played the part of the blissful idiot. I smiled, I waved, I pretended that my life wasn't a meticulously crafted lie. I was a puppet, and the strings were being pulled by my family, by Henry, by Vanessa. Then there was him, Alexander Kane. He was the opposite of everything I was supposed to want. He was older, for one thing, and he certainly didn't bother with the fake pleasantries of our social circle. He was known as a ruthless businessman, shark in the financial world, a man who built empires and crushed anyone who got in his way. He was basically the human embodiment of a do not approach sign. But he watched. I'd catch him looking at me at those endless parties, his gaze intense, unervingly perceptive. It wasn't lecherous, not exactly. It was more like he was assessing me, sizing me up, seeing through the facade. I remember this one time at some ridiculously ostentatious charity auction. This slimy art dealer, Davies, was practically drooling all over me, trying to pressure me into buying some hideous modern sculpture that looked like a pile of scrap metal. It's an investment, Miss Stone, he oozed, his breath reeking of cheap champagne. A statement piece. I was about to cave just to get rid of him when Kane appeared out of nowhere, like a damn ninja in a perfectly tailored suit. Mr. Davies, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that could probably curdle milk. I believe the lady said no. Davies practically jumped out of his skin. He mumbled some pathetic apology and scurried away like the cockroach he was. Kane looked at me, his gray eyes like chips of ice. You all right? Yes, thank you, I managed, my voice embarrassingly shaky. He just nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture, and then poof, gone, vanished back into the shadows. I should have been grateful, I guess, but honestly he just creeped me out. He was too intense, too real. He was a stark reminder that there was a world outside my gilded cage. A world where actions had consequences and charm wasn't a substitute for a soul. Little did I know, he was the only one who truly saw me, saw through me. The Henry-Vanessa double act was so obvious. It's a wonder I didn't see it sooner. Years before the engagement, when I was still in my teens and delusionally in love with dear sweet Henry, I walked in on them at our beach house. There they were, perfectly and innocently out of my line of sight. "Henry, stop," she laughed. "Evelyn will see us." He responded, "She won't mind. After all, you will always be my number one." He was referencing a song that he knew I hated. That should have been the start of my new life, but back then I pretended I didn't see anything, that I'd imagined the whole thing. Henry was so convincing with his devotion, and Vanessa, well, she was my sister. Surely I was just being paranoid, right? They were playing me like a fiddle. Henry, with his grand romantic gestures and his empty promises, was securing my family's backing for his business ventures. Vanessa, with her faux concern and her whispered criticisms, was slowly poisoning my confidence, isolating me from anyone who might have seen through their charade. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a slow, insidious erosion of my self-worth until I was nothing more than a puppet dancing to their tune. I was so busy trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect fiancée, the perfect socialite that I didn't see the knife until it was buried deep in my back. And even then, I probably would have apologized for bleeding on their expensive rug. The engagement party was obscene, held at my parents' ridiculously oversized mansion. It was a monument to excess, a testament to everything that was wrong with my life. Think ice sculptures that cost more than a teacher's salary, enough champagne to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a guest list that read like a who's who of social climbers and trust fund babies. Henry, of course, was in his element. He worked the room like a seasoned politician, shaking hands, flashing that toothpaste ad smile, and dropping just the right amount of self-deprecating humor to make himself seem relatable. He was a master of the performance, and the audience was eating it up. "Evelyn is just the most amazing woman," he declared loud enough for everyone to hear as he raised his glass in a toast. "Beautiful, intelligent, kind. I'm the luckiest man in the world." I forced a smile, feeling like a porcelain doll on display. The dress I was wearing, chosen by my mother of course, was a suffocating confection of silk and lace designed to showcase my assets. I felt like a prize-winning poodle, not a human being. "Just get through the night, Evelyn," I told myself. "Just smile and wave and pretend you're happy." Vanessa naturally was hovering nearby, playing the part of the devoted sister. She was wearing a dress that was suspiciously similar to mine, only in a slightly more attention-grabbing color. "You look beautiful, Evelyn," she purred, her eyes glinting with something that definitely wasn't sisterly affection, though perhaps a bit pale. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Vanessa," I replied, my voice tight. "Just worried about you," she continued, her smile widening. "You seem a bit stressed. Planning a wedding can be so overwhelming, can't it? Especially when your fiancé is secretly in love with your sister," I thought bitterly. I caught snippets of conversation throughout the evening, whispers and murmurs that confirmed my growing unease. "Such a lucky girl, Evelyn, marrying into the Sterling family. He could have had anyone, but she's got the connections. Wonder how long it will last. Henry has quite the wandering eye." Even my own parents seemed more interested in Henry's prospects than in my happiness. "He's going to be a senator one day, Evelyn," my father said, beaming with pride. "Just imagine, you'll be the wife of a senator. And you'll be miserable," a voice said, startling me. I turned to see Alexander Kane standing behind me, a glass of something dark and amber in his hand. He was observing the scene with a detached, almost cynical expression. "Mr. C," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I didn't see you there." "I prefer to observe," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the room. "It's enlightening." "And what have you observed, Mr. Kane?" I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He looked at me, his eyes piercing and intense. "That you're living in a gilded cage, Miss Stone, and you don't even realize it." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He saw through the facade. He saw the truth before I could respond. Henry appeared, his arm sliding possessively around my waist. "There you are, darling," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "I've been looking for you everywhere." He gave Kane a curt nod. "Kane didn't expect to see you here." "I'm full of surprises," Sterling C replied, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. He gave me one last lingering look, then turned and walked away. The rest of the evening was a blur. I went through the motions, smiling, chatting, playing the part of the blissful bride-to-be. But Cain's words echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition of what was to come. The fall, when it came, was swift and brutal. It was orchestrated, of course, with the precision of a military operation. First, the rumors, whispers of infidelity, of late-night rendezvous, of a secret lover I was supposedly seen in a compromising position with, a mystery man who conveniently bore a striking resemblance to one of Henry's business rivals. Then the financial scandal, accusations of insider trading, of embezzlement, of using my family's connections to secure illegal deals. My accounts were frozen, my assets seized, my name dragged through the mud. The media, always hungry for a juicy story, feasted on my downfall. I went from being the darling of society to its pariah overnight. My friends, the so-called loyal companions who had flocked to my side during the good times, vanished like smoke. My parents, blinded by their own ambition and social standing, turned their backs on me. "How could you do this to us, Evelyn?" my mother wailed, her voice filled with disappointment and disgust. "You've ruined everything." "But I'm innocent," I cried, desperate to make them believe me. "I've been framed. Henry and Vanessa, they're behind this." But they didn't believe me. They saw only the scandal, the shame, the potential damage to their own reputation. Henry, of course, played the part of the wronged fiancé to perfection. He gave interviews expressing his shock and disappointment, his heartbreak at my supposed betrayal. "I loved her," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I trusted her. I can't believe she would do this to me." The performance was Oscar-worthy. He even managed to squeeze out a few tears. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. I tried to fight back, to clear my name, but it was no use. The evidence, carefully fabricated by Henry and Vanessa, was overwhelming. My lawyers told me I had no chance. I lost everything: my home, my money, my reputation, my life. I was a pariah, an outcast, a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. And then the fire. It started in the middle of the night, a small, seemingly accidental blaze that quickly engulfed my apartment. I woke up to the smell of smoke, the sound of crackling flames, the terrifying realization that I was trapped. I tried to escape, but the door was blocked, the windows barred. The smoke was thick, choking, blinding. I stumbled, fell, my lungs burning, my body screaming in pain. And then I saw her, Vanessa. She was standing outside my window, her face ill, illuminated by the flames, a triumphant smile on her lips. "Goodbye, Evelyn," she said, her voice soft and chilling. "You should have stayed out of my way." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't an accident, it was murder. My own sister, driven by jealousy and hatred, had tried to kill me. The flames engulfed me, searing my skin, stealing my breath. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, and then I saw him, Alexander Cain. His face, blurred by the smoke and the flames, was the last thing I saw before darkness consumed me. He was reaching out to me, his eyes filled with concern, regret, love. I didn't know. But in that final fleeting moment, I understood he had been the one who had seen through the lies, the one who had tried to protect me, the one who had cared. And it was too late. "Alexander," I whispered, my voice a choked gasp, then nothing. The first sensation was the scent of lavender, my mother's favorite. Not the acrid stench of smoke and burning. Everything. I bolted upright, heart hammering, lungs gasping for air that didn't burn. I was in my bedroom, sunlight streaming through lace curtains I hadn't seen in a decade. Disorientation slammed into me, followed by a wave of nausea. I stumbled to the mirror, my legs feeling like jelly. The reflection that stared back was wrong, younger, softer. The haunted, hollow-eyed woman from the fire was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed girl on the cusp of womanhood. A girl I barely recognized. The calendar on the wall confirmed the impossible. 2 years. I was 2 years in the past, weeks before my disastrous engagement to Henry Sterling, the human embodiment of a gilded trap. "This time," I whispered, my voice raspy, not from smoke but from disuse, "I will follow my heart." It wasn't a resolution. It was a battle cry, a declaration of independence from the script I'd so foolishly followed before. In my heart, the one I'd ignored for so long was already pointing me in a very different direction. Towards Alexander Cain. The next few days were a masterclass in acting. I had to play the part of the old Evelyn, The naive, easily manipulated socialite, while inwardly seething with a decade's worth of rage and regret. Henry predictably was already circling. He'd call, his voice smooth and charming, filling my answering machine with messages about our future, and how excited he was to see me. I deleted them without listening. I started subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifting the dynamics of our relationship. Where I'd once been agreeable, accommodating, eager to please, I became distant, aloof. "Evelyn, darling, are you feeling all right?" Henry asked one afternoon as we were supposed to be planning our engagement party. He'd suggested a ridiculously extravagant affair at some over-the-top venue. I, in my past life, had gushed and agreed. "This time, I'm fine, Henry," I said, not even looking up from the book I was pretending to read. "Just a bit tired." He sounded genuinely baffled. "But we're choosing the floral arrangements. Don't you want to see cascading orchids? You love cascading orchids." "They're a bit much," I said with a dismissive shrug. "I was thinking something simpler, maybe wildflowers." He stared at me, his perfectly sculpted jaw actually dropping. "Wildflowers, Evelyn? This is our engagement party. It has to be spectacular." "Why?" I asked, finally meeting his gaze. "Who are we trying to impress?" "Henry," he sputtered, clearly at a loss for words. This wasn't the script he was used to. A few days later, I put another crack in his carefully constructed facade. My parents were hosting a small dinner party, and Henry, of course, was the guest of honor. He was holding court, charming everyone with his carefully rehearsed anecdotes and his practiced humility. And that's when I realized he was saying with a self-deprecating chuckle that I needed to give back, to use my privilege to help those less fortunate. It was a load of bull, of course. Henry's idea of giving back was writing a tax-deductible check to a charity that would put his name on a plaque. "Speaking of giving back, Henry," I said, my voice clear and sweet, "didn't you tell me you were volunteering at that soup kitchen downtown last week?" His smile faltered. "Yes, well, I was just wondering," I continued innocently, "how you managed to do that considering you were on that golfing trip to Pebble Beach all week?" A hush fell over the table. My mother looked confused, my father suspicious. Henry's face turned an interesting shade of red. I must have gotten the dates mixed up," he stammered. "Perhaps," I said with a perfectly polite smile. "It's so easy to lose track of time when you're busy." The seed of doubt had been planted, and I intended to water it diligently. Then came the gala, the social event of the season according to my mother, the perfect opportunity to put my plan into action. Forget the demure pastel-colored gowns I'd favored in my past life. This time I chose a dress that screamed defiance. It was red, a bold, vibrant crimson that made me feel powerful. It was sleek, form-fitting, and unapologetically sexy. "Evelyn," my mother gasped when she saw me, "that dress is rather revealing, isn't it?" "It's confident, Mother," I corrected her. "And I'm feeling very confident tonight." I arrived at the gala alone, refusing Henry's offer to escort me. He was already inside, no doubt working the room, cementing his position as the future Mr. Evelyn Stone. Little did he know the future was about to get a rewrite. The ballroom was a sea of familiar faces, the usual suspects of high society. I ignored them all, my gaze scanning the room, searching for one man. And then I saw him, Alexander Kane. He was standing near the bar, a glass of something dark in his hand, engaged in conversation with a group of men who looked like they could buy and sell the entire room. He was even more imposing than I remembered, his presence radiating a quiet power that drew the eye. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. It was now or never. I walked straight towards him, my heels clicking on the polished floor, ignoring the curious stares. Aries and the whispers that followed me saw me approaching. His gray eyes narrowing slightly, he dismissed the men he was with a curt nod, turning his full attention to me. "Mr. Kane," I said, stopping in front of him, my voice surprisingly steady, "I believe we have unfinished business." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Miss Stone, I wasn't aware we had any business, unfinished or otherwise." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that I knew would unsettle him. "Oh, I think we do," I said. "In fact, I think we have a future together." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Is that so?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear and confident, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. You see, Alexander, you're going to marry me. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, my gaze locked on his. Actually, scratch that. We are married, or at least we will be. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was on us, every ear straining to hear his response. Henry, who had finally noticed my absence, was pushing his way through the crowd, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Alexander, however, didn't react. He simply stared at me, his gray eyes intense, searching as if trying to decipher the meaning behind my outrageous declaration. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Is that a threat, Miss Stone? He asked, his voice a low, amused murmur. It's a promise, Mr. Kane, I replied, my smile widening. A promise I intend to keep. The whispers around us intensified. A chorus of shocked gasps and incredulous murmurs. I could see Henry pushing his way through the crowd, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Vanessa, lurking nearby, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but I didn't care. My focus was solely on Alexander. I'd thrown the dice, made my move. Now it was up to him to decide the next play. The aftermath was, to put it mildly, chaotic. The media went into a frenzy. Society scandal, screamed the headlines. Reclusive billionaire claimed by mystery bride. The story was everywhere, dominating news cycles, fueling endless speculation and gossip. My parents predictably were apoplectic. Evelyn, have you lost your mind? My mother shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch I hadn't heard since I'd accidentally dyed the family poodle pink. What have you done? I've taken control of my life, Mother, I replied calmly. Something you should have encouraged me to do a long time ago. But Henry, you're engaging your future, she sputtered. My future is not with Henry, I said, my voice firm. And frankly, I'm surprised you haven't figured that out yet. My father, ever the pragmatist, was more concerned with the social ramifications. This is a disaster, Evelyn, he said, shaking his head. You've made us a laughingstock. What will people say? Let them say what they want, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm done caring about what other people think. Henry, meanwhile, was a raging storm of fury and disbelief. He stormed into my apartment, demanding an explanation, his carefully constructed facade of charm completely shattered. Shattered? What the hell was that? Evelyn, he shouted, his face contorted with rage. Are you insane? You made a fool of me, of us. There is no us. Henry, I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. There never was. You were using me and I was too blind to see it. But I see it now and I'm done. Vanessa predictably was gloating. She thought this was her chance, her opportunity to finally win Henry's affections. She hadn't yet realized that the game had changed, that she was no longer a player but a pawn. Amidst the chaos, I sought out Alexander. I needed to explain, to apologize, to understand why he hadn't exposed me as a fraud. I found him at his penthouse office overlooking the city. He was standing by the window, his back to me, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Mr. Kane, I began, my voice hesitant. I owe you an explanation. He turned, his expression unreadable. An explanation or an apology? Both perhaps, I admitted. I know what I did was unconventional, reckless even, but I had my reasons. And those reasons are? He prompted, his gaze intense. I took a deep breath. I told him not everything, of course. I couldn't reveal the truth about my rebirth, about my knowledge of the future. That would have been madness. But I told him about Henry, about Vanessa, about the carefully constructed web of lies and manipulation that had trapped me. I told him about my desperation to escape, to break free from the life that had been chosen for me. I needed to make a statement, I explained, a public declaration that I was no longer under their control. And you, Mr. Kane, you were the perfect instrument. He listened, his expression unchanging. When I was finished, he simply nodded. You're a gambler, Miss Stone, he said, his voice thoughtful. You took a significant risk. I had nothing to lose, I replied. He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes piercing and perceptive. He saw the desperation, yes, but he also saw something else. He saw the strength, the resilience, the determination that had been hidden beneath the surface of the naive socialite. Perhaps, he said finally, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Or perhaps you had everything to gain. He then proposed a deal, a temporary alliance, a fake relationship to protect me from Henry and Vanessa, to give me time to rebuild my life, and perhaps to further his own business interests. He was, after all, a businessman, and he saw an opportunity in my unconventional approach. I find you intriguing, Miss Stone, he said, his voice a low murmur. You're not what you seem, and that interests me. And what do you get out of this, Mr. K? I asked, my voice cautious. A distraction, he replied, shrugging a bit of amusement, and perhaps a valuable ally. It was a calculated risk, a dangerous game, but I had nothing left to lose. I had a feeling, a gut instinct, that Alexander Kane, despite his reputation, was a man I could trust, or at the very least, a man I could use. All right, Mr. Kane, I said, extending my hand. I accept your offer. Let's play the game. He took my hand, his grip firm and strong. And as our eyes met, I knew that I had just stepped onto a very different path. A path that would lead me far away from the gilded cage of my past, and towards a future I could finally control. The game was on, and this time I intended to win on my own terms. The alliance with Alexander Kane was a lifeline, but I wasn't about to sit back and let him do all the work. I had a score to settle, and I intended to collect. It was time to unmask my enemies, to expose the rot beneath their gilded exteriors. My first target was Henry. Naturally, I knew his weaknesses, his vanities, his carefully constructed lies. I started digging, using my knowledge of his past, his habits, his connections. I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. I needed help, though, someone who knew how to navigate the murky underworld of information, someone who could uncover secrets that were meant to stay buried. That's where Julian came in. Julian Vance, a disgraced journalist, a man with a reputation for digging up dirt on the rich and powerful. He was a pariah in polite society, which made him perfect for my purposes. I found him in a dimly lit bar, nursing a drink and looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Vance, I said, sliding into the booth opposite him, I believe we have a mutual acquaintance, Henry Sterling. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. Evelyn Stone, the blushing bride-to-be. What can I do for you? I'm not the bride-to-be anymore, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice cold and hard. And I need your help. I need you to dig up everything you can on Henry Sterling and my sister Vanessa Stone. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. That's a tall order, Miss Stone. Sterling's got powerful friends, and your sister, well, let's just say she's not exactly known for her honesty. I'm aware of that, I replied. I'm also aware that you have a reputation for unearthing the truth, no matter how well hidden it is. He studied me for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. You've got fire, Miss Stone. I like that. What's your angle? Justice, Mr. Vance, I said. And a little bit of revenge. Julian proved to be an invaluable ally. He had contacts, sources, a network of informants that stretched into the darkest corners of society. He uncovered Henry's shady business dealings, his history of manipulating women, his secret affair with Vanessa. He even found evidence of their long-term plan to defraud my family. Armed with this information, I began to play the game. Alexander and I became the it couple, the talk of the town. We appeared at all the right events, hand in hand, smiling for the cameras, playing the part of the loving couple to perfection. The chemistry between us was undeniable. It started as a performance, a carefully orchestrated charade, but with every shared glance, every stolen touch, every whispered conversation, the lines blurred. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Alexander said one evening as we were leaving a particularly glamorous gala. Enjoying what? I asked innocently. The game, he replied, his eyes twinkling. The performance. The look on Sterling's face every time he sees us together is perhaps a little amusing, I admitted. You're natural, Evelyn, he said, his voice low and intimate. You were born to play this role. And I was using the media attention to my advantage, subtly undermining Henry's reputation, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of his investors, his friends, his allies. I gave carefully worded interviews hinting at his unstable behavior, his questionable business practices, his unfortunate tendency to misrepresent the truth. Henry is a complex man, I'd say, with a perfectly calibrated mixture of sadness and concern. I wish him well, of course, but I'm afraid his ambition sometimes gets the better of him. The whispers started, the rumors spread, and the carefully constructed facade of Henry Sterling began to crack. He knew it. He saw the shift in public opinion, the growing skepticism, the way his once loyal supporters were starting to distance themselves. He tried to fight back, of course. He tried to discredit me, to paint me as a jealous, vindictive ex-lover, but it was no use. I had the truth on my side, and I had Alexander. One evening, he cornered me at a party. He'd been drinking, his eyes bloodshot, his movements unsteady. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Evelyn?" he slurred, his voice thick with anger. "You think you can just destroy me?" "I'm not destroying you, Henry," I replied, my voice calm and even. "You're doing that all by yourself." "You're a liar," he shouted, "a manipulator. You're just like her." He meant Vanessa, of course. The irony was almost comical. "I'm nothing like Vanessa, Henry," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm simply showing the world who you really are." "You'll regret this, Evelyn," he threatened, his eyes filled with a desperate, almost pathetic rage. "You'll regret crossing me." "I doubt it," I said, turning to walk away. "I've already regretted trusting you, Henry. That's a mistake I won't make again. You won't get away with this. I made you." I looked back and glared at him. "No, Henry, you thought you did. Which one of us is on the floor now?" The cracks in their facade were widening, exposing the rot beneath, and I, the woman they had tried to destroy, was holding the chisel ready to shatter their world completely. The game was far from over, but I was finally playing to win, and this time I wouldn't lose. The fake relationship, as it often does, began to blur the lines between performance and reality. The staged appearances, the carefully orchestrated interviews, the stolen glances across crowded rooms. It all started to feel real. We spent more and more time together, not just plotting our next move against Henry and Vanessa, but simply talking, sharing, connecting. Alexander, I discovered, was nothing like the cold, ruthless businessman the world perceived him to be. He was complex, insightful, with a dry wit and a surprising vulnerability that he rarely showed to anyone. He told me about his childhood, his strained relationship with his demanding family, his early struggles in the business, his relentless drive to succeed. He spoke of his loneliness, his isolation, his difficulty trusting others. "I built walls, Evelyn," he confessed one evening as we sat on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city lights. "High walls to protect myself, to keep people at a distance." "And now?" I asked softly. He looked at me, his gray eyes filled with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "Now you've breached those walls, Evelyn Stone. You've climbed over them, stormed the castle, and captured the king." I in turn told him about my past. Not the rebirth, of course, that was still my secret. But I told him about my naivety, my misplaced trust, my desperate desire to be loved, to be accepted. I was so blind. I confessed, my voice filled with shame. I let them use me, manipulate me. I ignored all the red flags. "You were young, Evelyn," he said, his voice gentle. "And you were surrounded by wolves in sheep's clothing. It's not your fault." "But I should have known better," I insisted. "I should have seen through their lies." He reached out, taking my hand, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. "We all make mistakes, Evelyn," he said. "The important thing is to learn from them, to grow, to become stronger." And I was growing stronger with Alexander by my side. I felt invincible. He was my protector, my confidant, my partner. He shielded me from the media frenzy, defended me against Henry's increasingly desperate attacks, and provided me with the resources and support I needed to fight back. He was also undeniably becoming something more. The confession came on a quiet evening after a particularly grueling day of legal battles and media appearances. We were at his home, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of the world. We were sitting by the fireplace, a comfortable silence between us when he spoke. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I looked at him, my heart pounding. I knew what was coming. "I knew," he said, his gaze fixed on mine. "I knew about Henry, about Vanessa. I saw through their charade from the very beginning." I stared at him, stunned. "You knew?" He nodded. "I saw the way they looked at you, the way they treated you. I saw the discrepancies in their stories. I did my research, of course, it's what I do. But why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed, a hint of sadness in his eyes. You were in love with him, Evelyn, he said. Or at least you thought you were. I didn't want to interfere. I didn't want to hurt you. I know that ever since that day at the auction I could not stop thinking about you. I'm not sure what it was, but I felt drawn to you. He paused, his gaze fixed on mine. I was falling in love with you, Evelyn, even then. The words hung in the air, heavy and profound. My heart ached with a mixture of joy and regret. Joy at his confession, regret at the wasted years, at the pain I could have avoided. I was so blind, I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. I was so focused on Henry and the life I thought I wanted that I didn't see you. He reached out, cupping my face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away my tears. You see me now, Evelyn, he said, his voice soft and tender. That's all that matters. I do, I said, my voice trembling. And I think I'm falling in love with you too, Alexander. The kiss that followed was a culmination of everything. The shared struggles, the unspoken desires, the undeniable connection that had been simmering between us. It was a kiss that sealed our bond, a promise of a future together. And that future, I knew, would be sealed with a proposal. It wasn't a grand public gesture like the one Henry had planned. It was quiet, intimate, perfect. We were in his library, surrounded by books, by the scent of old paper and leather. He'd been reading aloud to me a passage from one of his favorite novels. Then he closed the book, looked at me and smiled. Evelyn, he said, his voice soft but firm. I know this isn't how we started. I know our relationship began as a charade. But it's become something so much more. Something real, something essential. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a ring. It wasn't ostentatious like the monstrosity Henry had given me. It was simple, elegant, a single perfect diamond that shimmered in the firelight. I love you, Evelyn Stone, he said. His eyes filled with a depth of emotion that took my breath away. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife for real this time? Tears streamed down my face. Tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming love. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Alexander, I will. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. It felt right, it felt like coming home. The wedding, when it happened, would be a private affair, a celebration of our love, not a spectacle for the world to dissect. We had nothing to prove, no one to impress. We had each other, and that finally was all that mattered. The gilded cage was gone, replaced by a love that was real, a love that was strong, a love that would last a lifetime or perhaps two. Our engagement predictably caused a tsunami in the stagnant pond of high society. The whispers, the rumors, the outright accusations, they flew thick and fast. I was a gold digger, a social climber, a manipulator who had used my feminine wiles to ensnare the reclusive and very eligible Alexander Kane. My parents, still clinging to the shattered remnants of their Sterling-approved dream, were livid. Evelyn, have you lost your mind? My mother shrieked during a particularly unpleasant phone call. Marrying Alexander Kane? He's ruthless, he's cold, he's not one of us. He's a good man, Mother, I replied, my voice weary. And he's the man I love. Love, she scoffed. You don't know the meaning of the word. You threw away a perfectly good future with Henry for this? For a man who will probably discard you as soon as he's tired of you. Henry, predictably, was fueling the flames, spreading rumors about my supposed instability, my manipulative nature, my gold-digging tendencies. Vanessa, ever the loyal viper, chimed in with her own carefully crafted lies. But the most formidable opposition came from within Alexander's own family. Margaret Kane, his grandmother, was the matriarch, a woman of immense power and influence, a dragon guarding the family fortune. She apparently did not approve of me. Alexander tells me you're unconventional, she said, her voice sharp and disapproving during our first and rather tense meeting. She looked me up and down as if I were a particularly disappointing specimen under a microscope. I prefer to think of myself as independent, Mrs. Kane, I replied, meeting her gaze directly. Independent, she repeated, her lips curling into a skeptical smile. Or perhaps opportunistic. I love your grandson, Mrs. Kane, I said, my voice firm. That's the only opportunity I'm interested in. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes narrowed, assessing. I could see the doubt, the suspicion, the ingrained belief that I was just another social climber trying to sink my claws into her family's wealth. But Alexander, bless him, stood by me. He defended me against my family's accusations. He ignored society's whispers, and he faced his grandmother's disapproval with a quiet determination that both impressed and terrified me. I love her, grandmother, he said during one particularly heated argument, his voice low and firm. And I'm going to marry her with or without your blessing. It was a declaration of war, a line drawn in the sand. I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me that our enemies would not let it stand. The charity event was the culmination of all the simmering tensions, the final desperate attempt by Henry and Vanessa to reclaim their lost power and destroy me in the process. It was hosted by Alexander's family, a lavish affair held at their sprawling estate, a gathering of the city's elite, the very people whose opinions Henry and Vanessa craved. It was the perfect stage for their twisted drama. I knew they were planning something. I could feel it in the air, in the way they looked at me, in the whispers that followed me as I moved through the crowded ballroom. They're going to try to humiliate you, Evelyn, Alexander said, his voice low and urgent as we prepared for the event. They're going to try to paint you as a liar, a manipulator, a gold digger. I know, I replied, my voice calm but my heart pounding. Let them try. I wore a dress that night that was the antithesis of the radiant debutante I'd once been. It was black, sleek, and sophisticated, a statement of defiance, a declaration of independence. Henry and Vanessa were predictably the picture of injured innocence. Henry, looking pale and drawn, played the part of the heartbroken ex-fiancé betrayed by the woman he loved. Vanessa, dressed in a virginal white gown, the irony was almost painful, clung to his arm, her eyes wide and sorrowful. The attack came during the main auction, a high-stakes bidding war for a ridiculously overpriced piece of modern art. Alexander had been bidding casually, almost dismissively, when Henry suddenly stood up, his voice ringing out across the room. I object, he declared, his voice filled with manufactured outrage. I object to this auction. I object to the presence of that. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, to Alexander, to Henry. Evelyn Stone, he continued, his voice rising in a carefully rehearsed crescendo, is a fraud, a manipulator. She's using Alexander Kane just like she used me. She's after his money, his power, his everything. Vanessa chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. It's true, she said, clutching Henry's arm. She's always been like this. Jealous, manipulative, desperate for attention. She'll do anything, say anything to get what she wants. They presented their evidence. A carefully curated collection of lies, half-truths, and fabricated stories. They spoke of my supposed past indiscretions, my financial instability, my history of manipulating men. The crowd, initially stunned, began to murmur amongst themselves. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, condemning. I could see the doubt, the suspicion creeping into their faces. I stood there frozen, feeling like I was back in that burning apartment, the flames of betrayal licking at my skin. But then Alexander moved. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, his voice a low, resonant rumble that silenced the whispers. Enough, he said, his gaze sweeping over the room. I've heard enough of these lies. He then proceeded to dismantle Henry and Vanessa's accusations point by point, exposing their deceit, their manipulations, their true motives. He revealed Henry's financial misdeeds, his history of infidelity, his desperate attempts to cling to power. He exposed Vanessa's jealousy, her lies, her long-standing obsession with Henry. I have never met a woman as honest and forthright as Evelyn, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, silencing the crowd completely. Those who try to slander her name are only revealing their own jealousy and deceit. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a love and protectiveness that took my breath away. Evelyn Stone, he said, his voice softening, is my fiancée, my future wife, and I will not stand by and allow anyone to disrespect her, to question her integrity, to threaten her happiness. He took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and in that moment I knew that I had won. Not just the battle against Henry and Vanessa, but the war for my own future. I had found my true love, my true partner. The man who would stand by me no matter what. The gilded cage was shattered, and I was finally truly free. The air crackled with tension, thick with the unspoken, the simmering hatred that had finally boiled over. Henry's and Vanessa's carefully constructed lies had been demolished, their reputations shredded, their futures uncertain. But I knew with a chilling certainty that Vanessa wouldn't go down without a fight. She was cornered, desperate. That made her dangerous. It happened so fast. One moment I was standing beside Alexander, basking in the warmth of his support. The next, Vanessa was lunging at me, her face contorted with rage, a sharp, glinting object in her hand, a letter opener snatched from a nearby table. "You!" she screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "You ruined everything. You stole him from me." It was a scene straight out of a bad soap opera. Only this was real. This was my life. My reflexes, honed by years of anticipating betrayal, kicked in. I sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the initial thrust of the blade. But Vanessa was relentless, fueled by a lifetime of jealousy and resentment. "You were always the favorite," she shrieked, lunging again. "The perfect one, the one who got everything. But not this time, Evelyn. Not this time." It was then, in that terrifying, chaotic moment, that I realized her true target wasn't me. It was Alexander. She'd seen the way he looked at me, the way he defended me. She'd understood finally that she had lost, that Henry was a means to an end, and that end was always Alexander's level of power and prestige. And if she couldn't have him, no one would. She pivoted, her eyes locking onto Alexander, her face twisted with manic fury. She raised the letter opener, ready to strike. "Alexander!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. I didn't think, I just reacted. I threw myself in front of him, shielding his body with my own. I felt a searing pain in my arm, a sharp burning sensation that made me gasp, but I didn't fall. I stood my ground, my body a barrier between Alexander and Vanessa's madness. Alexander, reacting with lightning speed, grabbed Vanessa's wrist, forcing her to drop the letter opener. Security guards rushed in, restraining her, dragging her away as she screamed and thrashed. It was over. "Evelyn, are you all right?" Alexander's voice was filled with concern, his hands gently examining my arm. The wound was superficial, a shallow cut that was already bleeding profusely, but the pain was nothing compared to the relief, the overwhelming gratitude that flooded through me. I'd protected him. I'd saved him. "I'm fine," I said, my voice trembling. "It's just a scratch." But it was more than that, it was a turning point. Margaret Kane, Alexander's formidable grandmother, had witnessed the entire scene. She'd seen Vanessa's unhinged rage, her attempt to harm Alexander, and most importantly, she'd seen my reaction, my selfless act of protection. She approached me, her expression unreadable. I braced myself for her disapproval, for her condemnation, but it never came. "You saved my grandson's life, Miss Stone," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "You put yourself in harm's way without hesitation. For that, I am in your debt." She reached out, taking my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I was wrong about you, Evelyn," she admitted, her voice filled with a rare hint of vulnerability. "I misjudged you. I thought you were another social climber, another gold digger, but I see now that I was mistaken." She looked at Alexander, her eyes softening. "You love him, don't you?" "More than anything," I replied, my voice unwavering. She nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Then you have my blessing, Evelyn Stone," she said. "You have my respect and you have my gratitude." Her words were more than just an acceptance. They were a validation, a proof of my worth, of my love for Alexander, of my place in his life. The final barrier, the last obstacle, had fallen. And then, a few weeks later, the miracle. I was feeling off, nauseous, tired, strangely emotional. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to stress, to the lingering effects of the confrontation with Vanessa. But then I missed my period. A home pregnancy test confirmed what I already suspected. I was pregnant. I told Alexander that evening over a quiet dinner at home. I handed him the test, my hands trembling, my heart pounding with a mixture of joy and fear. He looked at it, then looked at me, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes, a smile that filled me with warmth and happiness. "We're going to be parents," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. He knelt down, pressing his ear against my stomach as if trying to hear the faint heartbeat of our unborn child. "This changes everything, Evelyn," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is a new beginning." "Yes," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "A new beginning." The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place soon after. Henry, stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Julian and amplified by Alexander's influence, was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his gilded cage replaced by a cold concrete cell. Vanessa, deemed mentally unstable, was committed to a psychiatric institution. Her dreams of wealth and power had dissolved into a nightmare of delusion and despair. Whether she would ever find peace or sanity remained to be seen. I pitied her truly, but I couldn't help but see the justice. As for Alexander and me, we married shortly after, not for show, but because we were in love. We stood on the precipice of a new chapter, a future filled with the promise of love, a family, and a life built on honesty and trust. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they no longer defined us. We had overcome betrayal, navigated treachery, and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more deeply in love than ever before. "For this time," I said, looking at Alexander, "my husband, my partner, my love, we choose our own destiny." And we did. We built a life together. A life filled with laughter, with love, with the quiet joy of shared moments, and the unwavering support of a true partnership. The gilded cage was gone, replaced by a home, a family, a future that was ours and ours alone. The victory was sweet, but the journey, the struggle, the love, that was what truly mattered.